Hi everyone, I wanted to take a second to shoot another video on MLA formatting. After reading many of your position papers, I see that some of you seem to still be struggling with how to actually format your papers properly. So this is a supplement to your book resources and your web resources that are in the course site. But hopefully this will help answer some questions. I'm going to put this sample paper up on the course website as well, so you can use it to sort of function as a guide when you're writing your next papers. First of all, in MLA formatting, in the top right-hand corner of every page, you have your last name and the page number. It should be the same font, same color, same everything as the rest of your paper, so it's going to be 12-point Times New Roman font. Your last name and then the page number, and then the top line and this is in the header of the paper, and your word processor has the ability to edit the header, but editing the header may be a different process in different word processors, so you may have to look up instructions for how to do it with your specific word processor. Outside of the header and the body of the paper, we have your first name, last name, professor's name, course, and then the date in this format. A line below that, you have the title of your paper and then the first paragraph. You'll notice here in the sample I've got some information about what the introduction should do. The opening summarizes the article's purpose and notes the author's credentials. So it's going to basically summarize the purpose of writing your paper, and if you have any credentials that you want to list. Maybe you're an expert in whatever you're writing about. But the introduction definitely needs to end with some kind of a thesis. It can be a thesis statement in this paper. In this paper, I will argue that, or it can be a thesis question. In this paper, I want to explore whether or not dogs are better than cats, for example. So that's an example of a thesis question. A thesis statement would be, in this paper, I will argue that dogs are better than cats. You can look through some of the information about the body paragraphs in more detail if you want, but you'll find that all of this information is in your book. As far as the parenthetical citations go, this seems to be the thing that most of you are struggling with the most. And I'm trying to find in this paper an example of a parenthetical citation that includes an author name. Okay. I'm not seeing an example in this paper actually, but if you look right here at the end of this sentence where you have the number 62, that is a parenthetical citation that is just the page number for the quote in quotation marks here. So normally a parenthetical citation would be the author's last name and the page number. However, there's one caveat to that. If you'll notice here in this sentence, she recounts that one chimpanzee in her study named David Graybeard gently squeezed her hand when she offered him food. In the previous sentence right here, Goodall's evidence for this claim is an anecdote from her research. They've already mentioned the author's last name. So if you mention the author's last name in the sentence that you're including the quote, or I guess in this case the previous sentence, as long as it's clear to the reader who the author of the quote is, that's what's important. And if you mention it in the sentence, you don't have to include it in the parenthetical citation. However, if you do not mention the author's name in the sentence, then you will have to include it in the parenthetical citation. So for example, this is the OWL at Purdue's website. This is linked on our course page. And this is a fantastic resource for information on MLA formatting. Romantic poetry is characterized by the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And you'll notice here the citation is Wordsworth 263. So the author's last name of this was Wordsworth, and the page number this was retrieved from was 263. And also notice that the period comes after the citation. With one exception, the citation is always part of the sentence. The only exception to that rule is when you're doing block quotes. If you do a block quote, then the citation comes after the period. Hopefully most of you aren't doing block quotes. Basically a block quote is a large quote. In MLA formatting, if you have a quote that is more than 4 lines, you're supposed to drop it down and make it into a block. And a block quote would have a period before the citation. So that's kind of a minor rule, I guess. And I certainly wouldn't count anyone off for missing that one. So in general, just remember that the period goes after the citation. And the citation consists of the author's last name and the page number. Now, there is a reason why you use the author's last name. If you'll notice, scrolling down to the Works Cited page on this paper, you'll see that the very first word in the citation is the author's last name. So when you create those parenthetical citations, Wordsworth 263, the reason that you include Wordsworth is because that's the first thing that your readers will see on your Works Cited page. So it's an easy reference for them. They see Wordsworth here, they can come down to your Works Cited page and see Wordsworth right there. In fact, that's also the reason why the Works Cited page employs a hanging indentation. If you'll notice, Wordsworth starts flush left here, and on the second line, print starts indented. So normally an indentation would have the first line indented and the second line would be flush left. So for example, if you look at this paper, you'll notice that all of these paragraphs, the first line is indented and the second line is not. Second line and every line after that are not indented. However, when you do the Works Cited page, it's the opposite. And the reason that you do that is to make that word right there stick out. So that when your reader is looking through your paper and they see this parenthetical citation, Wordsworth 263, they can immediately go to your Works Cited page and get the full reference for that source. So in this case, they could actually go to the precise place, the precise source where you picked up that citation and reference back to it if they wanted to do so. So that's why you have a hanging indentation, and that's why the first word in the parenthetical citation is the last name of the author. Now, one thing to complicate this just a little bit more, because I know some of you are going to run into this, especially if you're using websites as one of your sources. Sometimes the author is not apparent. Sometimes you can't figure out who the author is. Many websites don't list authors, some articles don't list authors, and that's fine. If you've studied, like you should have been, if you've studied some on how to do MLA style Works Cited pages, you'll note that when you don't have an author, the first thing that shows up in the citation is the title of the piece, The Impact of Global Warming in North America. So this rule, the rule about the first thing in the citation being the first thing that should be in the parenthetical citation continues to apply. Since this is what's sticking out on the Works Cited page, this is what needs to be in the parenthetical citation. Now, for the purposes of the parenthetical citation, you'll notice that they did shorten the title, and that's fine. I believe MLA says you use the first 4 or 5 words. There's not a hard rule for that. You just need to use enough words that the reader can clearly and quickly identify that source on the Works Cited page. In this case, they chose to use Impact of Global Warming, and then this is the page number that the citation came from. So let's look back at the Works Cited page on this paper. You'll notice at the top of the page the words Works Cited centered. That is a rule. That is the way you should start any Works Cited page that you create. And then your citations all have this hanging indentation. So the first line sticks out and every line after that is indented. And of course the information that goes in the citation will vary depending on your source. And again, this page, the online writing lab at Purdue University, which is linked on our course website, has a lot of good information about how to cite different kinds of sources. For example, if you look over here on the left toolbar, it shows you MLA Works Cited citing electronic sources. So we'll click here, and here we can find how you actually cite websites. So we'll scroll down, and you could, on all of these Outlet Purdue pages, it's a good idea to read the top sections of the page. These usually contain basic information about this source type, But then you can scroll down and look and see, okay, we're citing an entire website, so here's what we're going to include in our citation. The editor, if there is one, the author, if there is one, or the compiler, if there is one. There may not be. And as a matter of fact, on websites, there's often not. Then you include the name of the site, the version number, if there is one, the name of the institution or organization that's affiliated with the site, the date of the resource creation, if it's available, the medium of publication, which in this case would be web, and the date of access. So here's the citation for the website that we're looking at right now. The Purdue OWL family of sites. See, there's not an editor, author, or compiler, so there's not one listed. So we have the title first, and this is the name of the site. Then we have the lab and OWL at Purdue and Purdue University, which are the names of the organization or institutional affiliation. We have the date of resource creation. In this case, the only thing we have, this is the date of resource creation. The only thing we have is the year. We have the medium of publication, which is web. And then the date of access is the date that you actually accessed the resource. And the reason that you include that is because websites are often updated. So someone checking your sources needs to know when you checked that website, when you cited that website, in case the information has changed. Now, you're often going to find yourself, when you're creating these citations on the Works Cited page, you're often going to find that you may not have all of the information required in these citations. And that's okay. Make a good effort to find all of the information that's required, but sometimes all of the information is not there. And generally speaking, if all of the information is not there, just include everything that you have. So include all of the required information that you have. If you need to leave some of this stuff out, that's fine. You may not have some of the stuff. But always, always, always include everything that you can find, and do your very best to make sure that a reader coming along later, reading your paper, can quickly and easily identify the specific source that you're getting your information from. There doesn't need to be any ambiguity. You need to make sure that they can identify the specific source that you're getting your information from. So that's pretty much the basics of MLA formatting as far as citations go. I'm looking forward to reading your second round of position papers. Just keep in mind that you do need to have 2 different sources for each of these position papers. Actually, while I've got you here, let's take a look at the instructions for the position papers real quick, because the instructions for the second position paper are the same. And basically the purpose of the position papers is to have you go out and explore 2 different sides of a topic. So I do want to see you including a source or sources that do not agree with your position. So if you are anti-abortion, I want to see you including arguments from sources who are pro-abortion. That does not mean that you have to agree with them. It doesn't even mean that you have to pretend to agree with them. What I want to see you doing is including their arguments, and then I want to see you trying to argue against their specific arguments. Part of the problem with new writers in college is that we often see what are called straw man arguments, which is where the writer doesn't understand the topic and doesn't really understand the arguments against their position. And so they wind up writing a paper full of arguments that either don't make sense or aren't real. For example, you might read an abortion paper that talks about people who believe in pro-choice are all baby killers or something along those lines. Well, that's not typically an argument that you hear from the pro-choice faction. So essentially the person is making up arguments. And part of what you have to do in academic writing, and I say have to because it's very, very important in all of your papers in college that you keep this in mind. You have to show your audience that you know the conversation, you know the research, you know what people are saying about this topic, not just the people who agree with you, but also the people who disagree with you. In order to win over your reader and help convince them to side with you on a topic, You have to convince them that you know what you're talking about. And if you jump into a paper that's if you jump in and write a paper that's completely one-sided, they're not going to trust you as an author. And after all, the reader's trust is what you're trying to gain from the first time you write a word on a page. So it's very, very critical that you pay close attention to all of the arguments on an issue. And then you take your own position and you use those arguments to craft your own argument about the topic. So that's the main thing with these position papers. I've had several of you who have written position papers that were basically, they were rants. They weren't really position papers, they were just kind of rants. And they didn't really include anything about the opposing argument. That's not taking a position, that's just ranting. Taking a position means that you understand the conversation, you understand the research, and you have a researched and valid position to add to the conversation about that topic. So that's what I want to see on the second version of your position papers, or on your second position papers. Of course, as you'll see in the instructions, keep in mind that these second position papers do need to be on a different topic than your first position paper. So you can't write the same paper over again. As always, let me know if you have any questions.